These two passages are chosen in the lectionary for today because, like I said, it is the Reign of Christ Sunday. And what that is the Sunday that we make sure everybody knows who's in charge. And the reason is because this is the last Sunday of the church year. The church year goes from Advent to Advent. It doesn't go from January to the end of December. It goes from the 4 weeks prior to Christmas until the beginning of the next 4 weeks prior to Christmas. And so we have Advent, which are the 4 weeks leading up to Christmas, and then we have Christmas time, and then we have Epiphany, when the wise kings or wise people got there. And after Epiphany, we have Easter. And after Easter, we have the season of Pentecost. And then we go into Advent again. And so this is the last Sunday of the church year. And so it's appropriate that the church year starts with the anticipation of the birth of Jesus, and it ends with the book of Revelation that says this Jesus who was born is the one who still reigns over everything, even though we have gone through a season of knowing that Jesus was killed and crucified and buried and he rose. It's a time of reflecting on how good we have life, because between the Alpha and the Omega, between the beginning and the end, between the first letter of the Greek alphabet and the last letter of the Greek alphabet, God is in charge. Nothing before, nothing after. God is what is after. God is what was in the beginning. And over all the troubles we have, and all of the fears that we encounter over the year, it's good to know and be reminded at the end of this church year that God is still in charge. God is still in charge. All the bad things. There were two young kids who, for some reason that I do not know, were living with their grandmother out on the grandmother's farm. I don't even know where the grandfather was. But they were living with their grandmother, and they always shared in the chores around the farm. And one day, James, the younger brother of Rachel, was out in the woods practicing with the new slingshot he had just made. And he was shooting at birds and at animals and at trees, and he didn't hit a thing. All the time he practiced, he would shoot and hit nothing. And so he knew it was about supper time, so he came back out of the woods toward Grandma's house, and he was frustrated and angry that he hadn't even hit anything. And he saw the flock of geese over there, and he went boom, and killed Grandma's favorite goose. He finally hit something, and it was Grandma's favorite goose. And he was scared to death of what Grandma would say and do, because he knew this was her prize one. And so he hurried and he grabbed the dead goose and he buried it under the wood pile. And then he went on in. Well, Rachel came up to him as he came to the door of the house and said, I saw what you did. And if you don't want me to tell Grandma, you will do what I say. And he was still scared and said, okay. So they went in and they had supper. And Grandma said, well, Rachel, I think it's your turn to do the dishes. And Rachel said, oh no, Grandma, James wanted to do them tonight. And James just looked at her like, what? But he knew she was going to tell Grandma, so he said, yeah, I really want to do that tonight, you know. So he started washing dishes, and Rebecca went outside. And a little bit later, Grandma said, well, Rebecca, why don't you go out and bring in some wood then, so we'll have enough for the night, since James did the dishes. And Rebecca said, I would, Grandmother, but James said he was looking forward to carrying in the wood tonight. And James said, yeah, that's right. I want to go carry the wood. The next morning, they got up, and Grandma said, Rebecca, why don't you go out and gather some eggs for our breakfast this morning? And she said, oh, golly, I want to do that. But James really begged me to do that this morning. And James finally had had enough. And he looked at Rachel and said, no, I didn't say that. And grandmother, I killed your goose. And I hid it under the wood pile. And then he just stood there like, ooh, what's going to happen now? And his grandmother went over to him and said, James, I was standing at the kitchen window when you killed my goose. I knew you had killed my goose. And I knew it was under the wood pile. And James said, you did? And she said, yes. I was just waiting to see how long you would let Rebecca have power over you before you would tell the truth. Ever been there? Ever broken your mother's lamp? Or the vase, or, went out to mow the lawn and pulled the cord out of the lawnmower and didn't want Dad to know? You ever done anything where someone else saw you and threatened, and until you come forward and say, I'm the one that did this, then they have power over you. They have power over you. And you have heard the scripture before, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall what? Set you free. You shall know the truth, and the truth will set you free. And that's very obvious in this story about Rebecca and James. The truth, when James was ready and willing and brave enough to tell the truth, he took back his own power. He took back his own authority, and he took it away from Rachel, who was holding it over him. And so we have in this passage today, a passage where Jesus says, is before Pilate, and Pilate says, are you a king? And Jesus said, no, I'm not a king of this world, but I'm a king in the world to come. And he said, if I was a king in this world, my followers would be fighting and storming the castle here to keep you from turning me over to the Jews. And what I have really come for was to bear witness to the truth. I have come to bear witness to the truth. And then we have Revelation that says, I am the Alpha and the Omega. What's so really neat about these two scriptures put together is that Jesus says, here's the truth. I am the Alpha and the Omega. I am everything. I am everything, and I want you to fall under this cover of who I am. And I want you to live Christ-like lives. And if we learn to live Christ-like lives, then we become people like Grandma, who was willing to forgive and was willing to see that the lesson that James learned in that situation was good enough for this teaching moment. She didn't have to punish him. He had already punished himself for 2 days, and she knew that he understood. Grandma was living a Christ-like life. And just think what it would be like if all of us were living that Christ-like life. What if we were a Christ-like father? What if we were a Christ-like mother or sister or brother? What if we were a Christ-like teacher or principal? What if we were a Christ-like postal person? Or what if we were a Christ-like clerk at the grocery store? What kind of lives and service would we give? What kind of life would we lead if we told the truth in all situations? If we were willing to be honest in all situations? If we were willing to see how much our lies and our covering ourselves was really hurting someone else? What if we were living as if Jesus was the Alpha and the Omega, as if Jesus was everything? What if that's what the Scripture is about today? That Jesus is the Alpha and the Omega and nothing else matters. And that if we can live under that reign of God and take that love and accept it, then we don't have to worry about anything else. There was a young couple interviewed on TV the other night after the attack in Paris. You may have seen it. It was the young couple, her name was Isabel, and his name was Amory. I'm not sure I'm saying those correctly, but they were a young couple who were in the theater when the terrorists went in and started shooting. And they had survived. They had survived. And many of their friends and others had not. And they were sitting there talking to Anderson Cooper. And he was asking them questions. And they said that when the shooting started, Amory, the boy, said he was pushed into the restroom with a whole bunch of other people who were running in there trying to hide. And Isabel just laid on the floor and said, I played like I was dead. She said that's all I could think of, was to fall down and play like I was dead. And she said there were all these other people lying around me, and she said I was afraid to see if they were alive or dead. But she said, then I could see them moving a little bit each. And she said the hardest thing for me was to not breathe or move or to cry. Or to cry. And she said, then as I lie there on the floor, she said that the thought came into my heart that I didn't want to die with hatred in my heart for those who were shooting. She said, I didn't want to die with hatred in my heart and fear. I thought that if I'm going to die, I'm going to die with love in my heart. I'm going to die with love in my heart. And she said, and I want everybody around me to know they are loved before they die. She said, because I couldn't fathom what it would be like for them to die and maybe never heard the words, I love you. And so she said, I began to risk talking. And I looked to those people around me who could hear, and I whispered, I love you. I love you. I love you. I love you. I don't know about you, but I think that kind of says it all. What is our role? To make sure that the people in this world, God's people, know they are loved, and that God reigns over all. Let's feel that in our hearts as we get ready for this Advent season, so that we can see the season with the love of God in our